Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Coming up on the program, pot's been legal in Illinois for just over a month. We check in on how it's going. Speaking of drugs, could City Council decriminalize magic mushrooms next? A push to preserve historic buildings on the fast-changing near North Side. What to expect at this Sunday's Oscars, and the Chicago ties behind a famous folk song. But first, to Phil Ponce and new controversy over the site of the Obama Presidential Center. Phil.
Thanks, Brandis. New concerns from the community over the Obama Presidential Center and fears it could cause gentrification and eventual displacement of the area's lower-income residents. Yesterday, Alderman Jeanette Taylor and others spoke out, criticizing the Lightfoot administration for its latest effort to reassure the community that it would be protected. Will the estimated $500 million project push up property values and taxes and squeeze out some current residents? Here to discuss those issues, our 20th Ward Alderman Jeanette Taylor, who represents part of the Southside area around the planned Obama Presidential Center, and Carmen Ruffin, a longtime resident and homeowner in Woodlawn. We invited Chicago Housing Commissioner Marisa Navarra or someone else in the mayor's office to participate, but they declined. Instead, they put us in contact with Ms. Ruffin. We also invited a representative of the Obama Foundation to join us. They also declined. Alderman, Ms. Taylor, Ms. Ruffin, thank you both for being here. We very much appreciate it. Alderman Taylor, last year you and a group of like-minded residents put forth your own proposal on how the Obama Center would interact or impact residents around the neighborhood. And yet, the Lightfoot administration came up with its own proposal. What was your reaction when you saw that proposal?
I felt bamboozled. That's not what I was told. I was told by Marisa Navarra, who is the commissioner, that we would look at the CBA ordinance, find the things that we agree or disagree on, that we would fix them. We would add some things because the community felt like home ownership was missing, and that we would introduce something that we could get passed. And they wrote their own ordinance.
So you say that their version is watered down. In what way is it watered down? Because
it only addresses the right to first refusal. So part of the story that people don't know was I was displaced from Bronzeville. We got the Harold Washington Cultural Center.
You personally?
Personally, not nothing. I'm talking from lived experience. The Harold Washington Cultural Center came, the property taxes went up, and I couldn't afford to live in the community anymore. And actually the buildings that we lived in, they ticketed so much that the people who owned them lost them. And so we're starting to see that same exact thing happen in Woodlawn. And Woodlawn was one of the only places. My mother was a retired CPS clerk, and I worked for a community organization. And Woodlawn was the only place that we could afford to live in the city.
And that's where where you live now. Let's look at some of the differences between your proposal, the one you submitted last year, and the one that the city just revealed. First of all, your proposal, your CBA, includes a 2-mile radius of properties that would be protected. The city proposes only 5/8 of a mile. Your proposal, your CBA, requires all new housing on vacant lots. The city lots be affordable. The city does not have that requirement. And the city also left out your pilot zone, which increased the number of affordable units. Carmen Ruffin, what is your reaction to the city's proposal as opposed to what the alderman and her colleagues wanted?
I just think the attraction of the library is in itself overrated because it historically will only draw 200,000 people to visit libraries if you look at how many people visit the library. But we already have a draw for Woodlawn, which is the Museum of Science and Industry, which draws 2 million people. Our area hasn't been developed. There's no creation of generational wealth in our homes. So if we add more rental property or rental units, there's no stabilization of our community.
So what you're interested in is the promotion of home ownership as opposed to rental units for low-income residents.
I am, very much so. I would like to realize my property value. I've been in this community for 16 years. My property value hasn't increased in 16 years.
And you'd like to see it go up?
I would. I would like to tap into some of the things for generational wealth. I would like to leave something for my kid. I would like to be able to develop my home. I would like for just things that other communities are able to leave to their families, our communities have never realized its property values. They've always been suppressed. So for our area, we're 30% impoverished, 30.7% impoverished. But the city of Chicago, we're 30% of the population. Just in Woodlawn, we're 30% impoverished. We can't keep adding. It's like a trap where we don't create wealth, we don't create economic development.
And you think promoting more housing for low-income residents would go against the interests that you're describing of property appreciation? Alderman Taylor, does she have a legitimate concern?
She does, but when do we say that when development comes? So let's think about this. We're talking about the first Black president, and this is not a library. This is a center. This will be definitely something different than what other presidents get. So, and we're talking about Barack Obama. So that's number one. Number two, when investment happens in Black and brown communities, usually low income and working families are the first to be pushed out. In a city where we're saying we don't want to see Black and brown people leave. And so when do we put our foots down and say, hey, let's create measures to make sure that they're able to stay? I'm not going to be able to stop gentrification. I'm not a fool. I'm not crazy enough to think that. What's always been my push is to make sure that the people who actually live in the community get to stay. And that's what this is about. And so I've always been able to come to the table and say, what's the balance? But I haven't gotten that from the housing department. I haven't gotten that. I've just recently had a conversation with Lori, and I've said to her, and I'll say it again, it does not look good for two Black women to be fighting. And while we might not agree on some things, where can we meet in the middle? And so that was not communicated to the mayor when I'm talking to Commissioner Navarro, which is part of the city's entire problem. Those departments and heads and people don't work together. We work in silos. And while that is happening and we're arguing, people are being displaced from our community every day.
Carmen Ruffin, what is the balance between those of you who are homeowners and would like to see values go up and the needs of low-income residents who need rental housing? And the argument on some folks on your side of the issue is that by adding more lower income residents or providing housing for them, that it makes the community economically stagnant. What is the balance?
The balance is adding affordable home ownership. I don't think that the rental, we already have 45% rental property and 19% home ownership in Woodlawn. So adding more rental properties keeps our area destabilized. We're not adding affordable houses that maybe you can do subsidies to have middle income people stay in their homes or buy or get home ownership or be able to assess home ownership. But to add more rental properties, it just destabilizes the area. There's nothing that keeps a renter in an area and makes them invested in community. They can move to the next place.
How about that, Alderman? This is the age-old argument that renters don't have any skin in the game.
I've been there 10 years. I would have stayed in Bronzeville my entire life. I love the community that I'm in, and I love that I serve. The problem is Woodlawn has always had the problem of this homeowners against renters. That's problem number one. Number two, I'm the alderman. I don't have a stake. I want to be there. I'm there because I love the community. I love where I stay. And we need to have a real conversation about affordability. Everybody does not want to own a home. Think about this. I pay $1,000 for rent. That's not lights. That's not gas. That's not cat. That's not dog. That's not husband. That's not children. If I wanted home ownership after 9 years, I could get it. It's not a problem. I really could afford it now, thanks to the great taxpayers of Chicago. I'm not interested. I've seen the city tax people out of their places. I've seen people, this is the type of predatory stuff that's going on in our community. People who are interested in buying the properties are calling 311 to call in and talk about something that's wrong with the building, and these building owners are getting tickets. After you ticket a person for so long, tuck pointing, the back porches, garbage, what do you think's happened? Either they raise the rent for those renters who are in there, or they go, I can't afford to stay anymore, I'm gonna sell anyway. So that's the type of thing that's going on in the community.
Carmen Ruffin?
It's not just ticketing for back porch and those things. I've been in that community 16 years. We've fought through people doing drugs in front of our homes, people breaking in our garages. We've invested in the community. So it's not just about trying to misplace, it's trying to stabilize the community so that the people who are renting, they won't just throw garbage out of their car, because you have to pick up. You have a vested stake in community. It's not just about making people move based on gentrification. It's about the amenities that come with development in a community.
Alderman, what is the next step now that the city has put up what you call a watered-down version of protecting low-income residents as opposed to the version that you put out? What happens next?
So now we're looking at the surveys so the Housing Commission had an open house where people were able to give in their input and kind of say what they want to see happen or added or subtracted to the ordinance. And then we're in negotiations now. So we're back at the table. It's never about us not being back at the table. It's about folks listening and being able to work together. I hear her concerns, but at the end of the day, think about what happened in Pilsen, in Little Village, in all of these communities where Latino and Black folks stay. You get something really nice there and you say to hell with the people who've been dealing with disinvestment for years. And there's this misconception of people don't want to build. I'm the alderwoman of the 20th Ward. I got developers coming in every day wanting to build in my community. And you know why they're on hold? Because I've said to them, we got to have these conversations, which I've always said to the city from the get-go. Yes, I'm a politician, but I'm an organizer all day long. And so you organize around what people want to see. I don't disagree with her point, and I hear her, but there are a bunch of other folks that we all got to listen to, and that's something that the city has never done, allowed us to work it out. They pit us against each other. And
that's where we'll have to leave it. Alderman Taylor or Carmen Ruffin, thank you both for being here. Very much appreciated.
Welcome.
And we're back with more Chicago Tonight, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Allstate. Allstate is investing in Chicago's youth. We believe good starts young. That's why we're helping our youth develop the skills they need to achieve success in life. Allstate is proud to empower the next generation of leaders.
Just beyond a month after Illinois legalized marijuana, questions remain about whether the problem is as equitable as promised. The popularity of pot is also affecting medical users. Chicago Tonight's Amanda Vinicky is here with some updates. Amanda.
Brandis, marijuana is popular in Illinois, so much so that, as predicted, there's a shortage of the product. And while lines may not be down the block like they were the first couple of days in January, some cannabis dispensaries have taken actions, like recreational customers must book appointments. There's some of those long lines from early January. There are also limits on how much cannabis you can buy. That's been a stressor for some medical marijuana patients who rely on weed as medicine. Just this afternoon, the State Department of Financial and Professional Regulation sent a memo to cannabis dispensaries. The recreational marijuana law sought to prioritize patients over recreational users, but just what that means hasn't been clear. This memo spells it out some. Dispensaries must first have at least one point of sale station that's exclusively for patients. Secondly, while recreational marijuana is taxed at a state rate of up to 25%, medical cannabis, like other medicine, is at a rate of 1%. The new guide makes clear Illinois patients must be able to purchase any cannabis product in the dispensary's inventory at that medical cannabis rate. And finally, if the pot shop does limit what customers can buy, any limits on patient purchases must be set at 2.5 times greater than the purchase limit for adult use purchasers.
So, Amanda, will these guidelines make much of a difference?
Well, they're just out, so hard to tell, of course, and industry insiders predict that it could actually be years before the state licensed marijuana growers will be able to catch up with demand. And that raises another point. Illinois' marijuana program is highly regulated, and right now, the only places legally selling recreational pot are those that were originally operating as medical dispensaries. 700 applicants submitted applications for licenses, 4,000 licenses. Only 75 will be awarded. Here's the scene from last month on the day applications were due. Winners will find out whether they won one of those 75 coveted licenses in May. That's not soon enough for critics who say that the process is shutting out minorities, even though they went to prison at disproportional rates, that is, for drug crimes in the not too distant past when marijuana was illegal. Mark Carter is one of those individuals. He says he was released from a prison sentence he was serving for drug crimes in 1998. Instead of limiting marijuana sales to expensive dispensaries, he's advocating for peddlers' licenses.
If we don't have some type of authorization from the city, then the police will be used once again to mass incarcerate. And so this dispensary has their dispensary license. We're saying these peddlers' license would then give the opportunity to the little guy and the little lady.
Peddlers' licenses are not allowed in state law, and there's no indication that that's going to change, though both Governor J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Lori Lightfoot have said ensuring individuals from disadvantaged communities can take advantage of the economic opportunity created by legal cannabis is a priority for them. But Alderman Jason Irvin, who chairs the Chicago City Council's Black Caucus, says he would consider introducing a peddler's license ordinance.
I think it's worthy of a conversation, and if we need an ordinance to start a conversation on how we can increase diversity and equity in the dispensing of cannabis, I'm open to that.
Irvin had unsuccessfully tried to delay marijuana sales in Chicago until this summer, by which time he'd argued it would be clear how many of those 700 applicants vying for those 75 dispensary licenses were Black or Latino. Until then, he says it's a lot of wait and see. So how does Alderman Irvin think legal pot's going in Illinois so far?
Depends on what side of the fence you're on. If you are a dispenser, it's working out very well. If you're trying to become a dispenser, it's not working out so great.
Amanda, is there anything that could change before May?
Still undecided is how Chicago is going to handle smoking lounges, as in if or where marijuana users can light up outside of their own homes. In particular, whether this will be permitted at hookah and cigarette smoking lounges that already exist, standalone consumption establishments that would need to pay a hefty license fee for the right to open. The mayor's plan for that stalled.
One of the complaints that I've heard is that to spend $4,400 on a license in which I can't sell a product for, that's a challenge. And your total business is dependent upon something else, but again, using your space to consume. So these are some questions I think that need to be answered by the legislature.
Irvin says talks with the state and with the city are ongoing. Meanwhile, the state next week will begin accepting applications for a new round of licensing, those seeking a state license to grow or to transport cannabis.
Okay, it doesn't stop. Amanda, thank you. High lake levels lead the mayor to take a rare step. Paris Schutz has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Paris.
That's right, Brandis. Mayor Lightfoot is proclaiming the recent erosion of Lake Michigan shoreline a local disaster. With her proclamation today, Mayor Lightfoot is asking Governor J.B. Pritzker to unlock Illinois emergency management funds to help residents recover from a January storm where high waves caused beach, park, and home damage. The governor has issued a state disaster proclamation for Lake and Cook counties to provide some relief for the damage. Now, Lightfoot says the city needs more assistance from the state. Meanwhile, students at Lincoln Park High School held a sit-in during school hours this morning. This after the school's interim leader, Judith Gibbs, is being investigated for this incident, allegedly having improper physical contact with a student. Gibbs was appointed only days ago after the school's principal and assistant principal were temporarily removed. The school faces multiple investigations into sexual misconduct and other alleged wrongdoing. The students say they want answers from CPS about the investigations and the suspension of the men's varsity basketball season. Chicago aldermen are weighing new crackdowns on people who falsely pose as rideshare drivers. Chicago police say rideshare impersonators have lured customers into their vehicles and committed robbery, sexual assault, and other violent crimes. A new proposal backed by the Chicago Police Department would allow officers to stop vehicles if they have reasonable suspicion the vehicles are being driven by rideshare impersonators.
In order for us to stop somebody based on that suspicion, the act has to be illegal. And then we can act constitutionally and interfere with those rideshare impersonators who are then likely pretextually going to commit more violent crimes.
The state's former legislative watchdog says the, quote, fox is guarding the hen house when it comes to investigating wrongdoing by state lawmakers. Former Legislative Inspector General Julie Porter told a committee today that her investigation into wrongdoing of a sitting lawmaker was quashed by the board of lawmakers that oversee her work. Porter was joined in testimony by another former IG, Tom Homer, and current IG, Carol Pope. Porter says that any board that oversees the work of the IG should not be staffed by state legislators.
I tried very hard to do meaningful investigations to get to the bottom of things. it was a waste of time. Many of the things that I did have not been debated and assessed and discussed in the way that they should be because of the structure of the rules.
As for the weather, a few lingering snow flurries tonight and a low around 26, and then tomorrow partly sunny with a high near 33. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, could Chicago become the largest city to decriminalize natural psychedelics like magic mushrooms and peyote? A proposed new landmark district aims to preserve historic Chicago homes from demolition, but some owners worry it will tie their hands. Brad Pitt is hoping to grab his first Oscar ever this Sunday night. 2 local film critics share their predictions for this year's awards. Geoffrey Baer on the connection between a famous folk song and Chicago on this week's Ask Geoffrey. And in tonight's Viewer Feedback, your thoughts about the Super Bowl commercial promoting the Dakota Access Pipeline in Illinois. But first, some of today's top business headlines. Here's Crain's Chicago business editor, Ann Dwyer.
Thank you, Paris. The president of Brookfield Zoo plans to resign after 17 years at the helm. Crain's reports no departure date has been set for Stuart Strahl, who announced to his board of trustees that he's heading for the exit. Strahl is 64. The Chicago Zoological Society, which operates Brookfield, reported a $4.5 million deficit in 2018, the most recent year for which figures are available. Meanwhile, the owner of a vintage 10-story property aims to cash out, hoping to ride a wave of development in the southwest corner of the Loop. A venture of Mark Realty has hired Jones Lang LaSalle to sell the property at 216 West Jackson Boulevard. The asking price for the 121-year-old building is unclear, but a source familiar with the offering tells Crain's the property is expected to fetch close to $27 million. And finally, the pitchman for Wendy's new breakfast sandwich menu is a familiar face to the folks who work at McDonald's Chicago headquarters. That's because the man being featured in a barrage of social media ads promoting the new breakfast sandwiches is none other than Mike Herrick's, the former executive chef of Wendy's arch rival McDonald's. He left McDonald's in 2019 and now is touting Wendy's breakfast offerings in the ads. Wendy's breakfast menu is slated to debut in March, a rollout that's likely to intensify the already heated battle for breakfast customers in the fast food industry. For Crain's Chicago Business and chicagobusiness.com, I'm Ann Dwyer. Back to you, Paris.
Thank you, Ann. Pot legalization might just be the beginning. Chicago City Council is considering whether to decriminalize psychotropic plants like so-called magic mushrooms that contain psychoactive substances. Alderman Brian Hopkins introduced a resolution late last year to have the Chicago Department of Public Health explore the potential health benefits of such substances for treating a range of illnesses from PTSD to drug addiction. Here now to share his expertise on this issue is Richard Miller, professor of pharmacology and psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Northwestern Medicine's Feinberg School of Medicine. Thank you very much for being here, Professor Miller.
Good evening, Paris.
So remind us some definitions first.
Yeah.
What exactly is psilocybin, more commonly known as magic mushrooms?
Well, psilocybin is the chemical compound within the mushroom which actually has the drug effect on you. So, you know, a mushroom contains millions of chemicals, but this is the specific chemical that actually produces the drug effect, the psychedelic effect. In that mushroom, that's called psilocybin.
And then psilocybin, magic mushrooms are part of this larger class of substances known as entheogens. What is an entheogen?
Well, an entheogen basically means any kind of plant or natural product that engenders a feeling of spirituality in the person that takes it. So these drugs, like psilocybin, you mentioned mescaline, there's ayahuasca is another one. They're very, very ancient. These are not new drugs. They're some of the oldest drugs that are known to humanity. And they've been used for many, many years, specifically in a religious context. So, I mean, indigenous peoples in Central and South America, in Siberia, in Africa, all use these substances a great deal to engender spiritual feelings in the context of religious ceremonies.
And if Chicago, which is proposing this idea to decriminalize these substances, if they do that, they'd become the fourth city to do so, would be the biggest city. Is that a good idea for a city like Chicago?
Well, now that's a good question. The short answer is I think that it is a good idea, because the fact that these drugs are illegal in the way that they are at the moment is really a historical accident. I mean, what happened was that after being discovered by, the Spanish conquistadors when they came here and so on and so forth, the drugs were recognized as having the properties that they do have. And, they were repressed for a while by the Catholic Church, but then sort of rediscovered in the 1950s. And then there was a lot of interest in these drugs as potential medicines. There was a huge amount of research done in the 1950s and 1960s, more than 4,000 papers on drugs like psilocybin. And they were considered to be extremely promising from the point of view of therapy for a lot of psychiatric diseases.
And I know where this story goes. The 60s happened, and then there was a response politically in the 70s.
Right. What happened, instead of these drugs becoming useful medicines, they unfortunately got associated with the counterculture of the 60s. They became associated with the hippies, the yippies, a lot of people that the Nixon government didn't appreciate. And so what he did was to pass a law in 1970 called the Controlled Substances Act, which stratifies drugs according to schedules. Schedule 1 drug means that they're absolutely no medical utility whatsoever, and they're very, very dangerous. And what he did was to put all these drugs in that category. So that was a completely political move. It had absolutely nothing to do with whether they were any good or not.
Psychotropic drugs put in the same category as something like heroin,
yeah, exactly,
or something really dangerous.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back. You mentioned the spiritual properties of these drugs. What exactly is a psilocybin trip like?
Well, I wouldn't know, of course, but from what I've read about it, I mean, there's a huge amount of literature on this. It brings you out of yourself. Things look very different. They, you at certain doses, as the doses get higher, you actually can sort of leave your body. And the idea, I think, that the way that a lot of people would describe it is you become a part of a greater entity. It's something to do with transcendence, that you feel you're connected with nature, with other creatures, and with metaphysical entities like the entire universe.
Well, the phrase I've heard to describe it is ego death. That you lose your sense of having an ego in yourself, absolutely, and you kind of feel a greater part of everything else, as you just said.
Right, and that is something that now scientifically, with better technology that we have nowadays that we never had in the 1950s and 60s, there's actually quite good evidence for that kind of thing from hard science.
And speaking of hard science, tell us the science that is happening in someone's brain when these chemicals are interacting with a human.
Again, it's a complicated subject, so without getting too technical about it.
And I just want to say we're looking here at chemical reactions in the brain. On the left, when you're not tripping on mushrooms. On the right, when you are, there's a lot more happening, to say it very unscientifically.
Right. So what you see there around the circle are the different parts of the brain, and the lines show you how they're connected to each other. What you can see on the left is your normal brain when things are just ticking over. But if you take psilocybin or LSD or ayahuasca, what happens is that sort of dissolves, and you get this enormous increase in connectivity through many, many different parts of the brain that you didn't have before. And exactly what that means in terms of spiritual and other behaviors, that's the cutting edge of research as it is at the moment.
And speaking of research, tell us the research that's been done on patients with PTSD, with drug addiction, and end-of-life patients who stunningly come back and report at high levels that they've lost their anxiety about death.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting thing. As I said, these drugs were considered very promising adjuncts to psychotherapy and things back in the 60s. Then they fell off the map. Now they're coming back again, and a particular interest is their use in depression. So I can tell you the FDA, which of course is a government organization, has fast-tracked psilocybin now for the treatment of depression. They're really going to take a very careful look at it. So they are taking it very seriously. It seems to have a very beneficial effect on a number of depressed patients. It's a completely different kind of therapy than the ones we're used to, SSRIs and so on. And we certainly need new drugs for treating depression, which is a very debilitating illness. And yes, end-of-life patients, drug-addicted patients, many possible interesting effects.
Been a number of books written, including your own, that talks about people's life-changing experiences when they go on these drugs. But I have to ask you, if it becomes decriminalized in Chicago, is there a downside in terms of addiction or bad trips even?
Well, the good news is these drugs are not addictive. Okay, they are not addictive drugs like heroin and cocaine and things. They're not addictive. The downside, I mean, I think in terms of people developing their own spirituality, there isn't really too much of a downside. We've had thousands of years of experience. I mean, obviously there have to be laws to make sure that you're not driving your car or something when you're doing it. But in terms of people's personal development, I think it's probably quite beneficial. This is what we've discovered from history.
All right, Richard Miller, thank you so much for your expertise on this fascinating subject.
It's a pleasure.
15 historic buildings in the Near North neighborhood are headed for landmark status after the city's Landmarks Commission called for protecting them at a meeting this afternoon. As Chicago Tonight's Nick Bloomberg reports, the buildings represent a key moment in the city's history, and their landmark status would mean some restrictions.
The day John Cannellin moved into his building on Rush Street some 30 years ago, he says a guy walked right in and asked if he was the new owner.
And I said, yep, and he said, would you like some pictures of it?
The guy said he used to be a newspaper photographer who still had shots of Cannellin's house and the surrounding neighborhood.
And look at that, is really a cool carved doorway, but now it's marble.
Cannellin's held on to the photos for decades and says he loves the history behind his building. It's one of 15 on the Near North Side built in the late 1800s that advocates want to preserve. Though many are now businesses, they were originally all homes for well-to-do Chicagoans. Beautifully designed and crafted 2-, 3-, and 4-story structures.
You walk down the street and you see a lot of tall buildings going up, and then you see these wonderful little row houses that have these charming little businesses in them. The human scale of these structures, this really gives a sense of place, a sense of history.
And they represent a fresh start. Built in the years after the devastating fire of 1871, half the buildings are Italianate, brick and limestone, elaborate carvings. The others are a mix. Queen Anne with asymmetrical form, varied colors and textures. Second Empire with a French influence. Some have a medieval flair from Romanesque details. And some of the architects were also responsible for remarkable buildings like the Newberry Library, the Ryerson House in Kenwood, and the Chicago Athletic Association. Lisa DiChiara of Landmarks, Illinois, says these 15 are survivors.
The amount of development that has happened in this neighborhood, the Near North neighborhood, particularly over the last 30 years, has really wiped out a lot of the remnants of the late 19th century development.
Despite their historic value, some property owners are worried that preservation efforts are going to tie their hands and make it difficult if they ever want to sell one of these buildings. If the landmark designation goes through, owners can't tear down the buildings or make any changes to their historic facades. Cannellin says he doesn't think teardowns are in the offing. He and other owners have spoken out at public hearings. One neighbor voiced fears for his future if he can't find a buyer.
As he said, this is my retirement. But if I can't get the money out of the building, I don't have a retirement. To me, they're not selling this concept.
Preservation advocates say they understand owners' concerns, but they've also watched the fabric of the city change.
When I was growing up in this neighborhood, just a little to the north, there were a number of mansions and row houses that were converted into restaurants and businesses. A lot of those have gone, and they've been replaced by tall buildings.
In fact, an application to demolish 2 of the buildings prompted the city to review and move to preserve these structures.
Without these buildings, we really would have no understanding of what the city looked like in that early development period. If they're gone forever.
Owners can make changes to the interiors of the buildings, even with a landmark designation. While it's not a done deal yet, John Cannellan says,
"You can't beat City Hall." Sorry about that, Mayor.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
At this afternoon's hearing, city staff noted that owners are allowed to build visible additions at the rear of their buildings if they're set well back from the street. The commission's recommendation still has to be introduced in City Council. Final approval could come as early as next month, and there's much more information on this on our website. And now we go back to Brandis and a preview of the Oscars. Brandis.
Hey Paris, most movie lovers have their calendars marked to watch the Oscars this Sunday night. And even though many believe the top award winners are obvious, this is still a surprising year for the Oscars. They are being broadcast earlier in the year. They once again will not have a host, and 4 films received at least 10 nominations, which is a record. And many are disappointed by the notable lack of diversity in major categories. So joining us to talk about it all are Angelica Jade Bastian, a Chicago-based staff writer for New York Magazine site Vulture, and Alejandro Riera, longtime arts journalist at many Latino media outlets in the city and currently a film contributor to Gozamos.com. Welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Glad to be here.
So let's focus a minute on the biggest change this year. They've moved up the date of the Oscars. Previously, it had been in early March. Last year was late February. This year, it's now February 8th. Was this a good idea? Bad idea, Angelica?
I actually think it's a great idea. Let's get all the award shows out of the way and be free of award season. I love that they're doing it early. I think it makes sense, especially because award season and the conversation can go on for so long. It can be kind of tiring.
Don't drag it out.
I will agree with that. I think the only drawback for having it early this season is that it didn't give voters enough time, those who are running behind on their movie watching, enough time to consider all the candidates. I was reading this morning that there was a point when last year they sent out a actual big screener package of the foreign language documentaries and short films to the members, and they started transitioning to streaming pattern. And the problem was that a lot of the TV sets for these members were not, compatible with the streaming platform. So that raised a whole host of issues that may affect which films win in the smaller categories like foreign language, international feature. Now it's called international feature, and documentary.
Okay, let's talk about the Best Picture nominees. This year there are 9, and they are Ford versus Ferrari, The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, Little Women, Marriage Story, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Parasite. Now, Joker has a total of 11 nominations. The Irishman, 1917, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood are all receiving 10 nominations. As I said earlier, that's a record for that many films to receive that many nominations. Let's take a look at 1917. It's considered to be the odds-on favorite.
Is that our friend? In some all habits. And to her point, the Academy loves its epics, and this is as close as epic as possible this year, even though there are far more worthier films. I think my problem with 1917 is that it's so showy that you never really connect with these characters, and yet it is that showiness that they so much love in the Academy, which makes you wonder, well, when the heck didn't give the award to Best Picture to Birdman many years ago? Because it's the same thing.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Film.
Right. So speaking of worthy films, the two of you both preferred Parasite.
Oh, hell yeah.
Alejandro, go on.
Oh, hell yeah.
Hard yes.
Well, it's a hard yes because it's a unique film. It's a film, you can find it at Snowpiercer. So, and really, this film has hit, this country. I mean, it's still playing in large theaters. It has hit like a nerve.
Oh, it totally has.
Angelica, is this one going to win some awards?
I hope it wins some awards. It's definitely the black horse for me. But I think it's such an amazing film, top to bottom, the cinematography, the production design. It's such an expansive ensemble and everybody is working in concert with each other. It's such a beautiful and sometimes very dark film.
Yeah, okay, so we have to talk about this. There's a lot of criticism for the Academy for who did and who did not get nominated in the acting category. Cynthia Erivo, who played Harriet Tubman in Harriet, only actress of color nominated and the only African American in any acting category. Angelica, what are your thoughts?
I'm ashamed on behalf of the Academy. There were so many amazing.
Oh, excuse me. She's not African American. She's British.
She is British. Yes. But there were so many amazing performances by people of color last year, and it's really frustrating that the only film that gets in is a slavery picture. It sort of shows a limited imagination for what Black representation can be and what sort of Black films are important.
Alejandro, who else was overlooked?
Lupita Nyong'o, for crying out loud. Us. What a performance. I mean,
Yes.
she's literally playing two roles. She using every single tool an actress has at her disposal. Her body, her language, her voice, her throat. I mean, it's just all a well-rounded character. I will say the one actor I was surprised and disappointed not seeing in this category, Awkwafina for The Farewell.
I agree.
A magnificent, touching, surprising, mature role from Awkwafina. I mean, that makes her an actress to keep an eye out on.
Definitely.
I was really disappointed. I mean, I could have lived, and you know, another Best Actress, since we're in the Best Actress category, you know, Charlize Theron, I believe, was nominated for the wrong role. I wasn't that impressed.
Long Shot?
I wanted Long Shot because it was the film where she stretched her wings as a comedian. I mean, it showed
That's
that she
very
has the
true.
potential as a comedic actress. And that's so hard doing comedy for a dramatic actress like
Yeah.
her. It's easier for a comedian to do drama than a
Yeah,
dramatic
that's very
actress to
true.
do comedy.
And as long as we're on women, the directing category, all male this year, when there were quite a few women
Greta
who
Gerwig?
made some Greta who? Who made some standout
Yes.
movies. And I think she did not get the nomination for director of Little Women, but the movie itself was nominated for Best Picture. But according to a USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative study, there were a record number of top-grossing films this year directed by women, 10%, and we still couldn't get a nomination.
Which is saying something, because there were so many great films. I really loved Atlantics by Maddie Diop. I thought that was
yeah.
amazing. Obviously, The Farewell, Lulu Wang. It just shows that, to me, it's very frustrating because it's almost like they're purposely trying not to include women. At a certain point, these biases have to be talked about and examined because they're institutional and they're very entrenched, and the Academy's not going to change unless we as audiences and critics put a fire under them.
Okay. Is Brad Pitt going to be a shoo-in? Is this his year? Is he going to get an Oscar?
I think so.
Yes, I do too.
Why?
I love his performance in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It represents a kind of wistful look at a Hollywood that is no longer with us.
Exactly.
It is, think of him as both a star and as an actor. As a star, he represents all of that masculinity that was so typical. I mean, we lost Kirk Douglas yesterday, so he represents that old school masculinity. But it's also a very introspective role for him. It's a very internal role, except for that final denouement. But it is very, but it's very introspective. So yeah, he's a shoo-in because he deserves it. Personally, my choice will have been Joe Pesci. He made an incredible comeback with The Irishman.
That is true.
He wasn't playing the outsized, clownish gangster. There was something much more serious, much more mature, much more pathetic, sad about his performance in the Irishman.
Okay, let's get to Marriage Story. I want to share a little bit of Laura Dern's performance in this. She's nominated for Best Supporting Actress.
Because the basis of our Judeo-Christian whatever is Mary, mother of Jesus, and she's perfect. She's a virgin who gives birth.
Sorry. Like Pitt, is this going to be her first Oscar, Angelica?
I definitely think it's going to be her first Oscar, although it's kind of disappointing because I feel the Best Supporting Actress category left a lot to be desired. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think Laura Dern's performance was all that good.
I just laughed at her. I thought it was entertaining. Like, if
It's
you had to pick
entertaining.
from this particular category of actresses, is there one that you would say that's the one that deserves it?
Florence Pugh in Little Women, I really thought her performance as Amy March was amazing, and it pissed me off, it infuriated me, it surprised me, and it's like really amazing to be surprised by a performer.
Okay. Joaquin Phoenix is nominated for Joker, and now he won the Best Actor award at the British Academy Awards, the BAFTAs, their version of the Oscars last weekend. He gave a speech. Let's hear a little bit of that.
I think that we send a very clear message to people of color that you're not welcome here. I think that's the message that we're sending to people that have contributed so much to our medium and our industry.
Now, do you think he's going to make a similar speech about race if he wins again this weekend?
We hope so.
I hope so.
Yeah.
The audience needs to hear it, and I think his message was very important, but what's even more important is what comes after in his career. I would love to see him work with more women and people of color directors.
Was it not a little bit surprising, though? I've never heard him reference our problems with racism.
Well, what I find interesting is the platform, because if there's one thing that I've really noticed in the last 10 years is that there's this great body of black actors coming out of Great Britain, you know, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Idris Elba, the amount of great black character actors that you can actually see on the BBC these days. So it seemed to me that the platform was deliberate, but I think he needs to do the same here in the United States, but even harsher. I think the message should be much more harsher here.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. We've got the A-Team, Angelica Jade Bashian and Alejandro Riera. Thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, Paris Schutz and Geoffrey Baer on the connection between a magical song and a local legend. So stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
What does a song about a mythical creature have to do with one of Chicago's most prolific and unusual artists? Geoffrey Baer explains in this week's edition of Ask Geoffrey. Geoffrey, great to have you back again.
Always good to be here.
Of course, you work here and are in a position of big import here. So our letter comes from Arnold Jackson in Chicago. Years ago, I heard a song that was a hit called the Unicorn Song. What can you tell me about it?
Oh, the Unicorn Song. So this was, of course, a popular hit in the kind of folk music era when it was really folk music was popular in the 1960s. Made famous by a band, bookmarked this, called the Irish Rovers. Irish Rovers. That was the name of the band. And it's basically about Noah leaving the unicorns behind when he got on the ark, so that's why we don't have any unicorns anymore. So here's a little sample from the Irish Rovers.
With the accordion there.
All of it.
It's an amazing group.
So I got to tell you, I have such fond memories of this song because my parents were really into like the folk music world in the 1960s, and they would have like folk singing parties at our house with their friends, and I'd hear the music wafting up the stairs while I was in the bedroom. So when this question came in about the Unicorn Song, I thought, wow, I wonder if that's got any connection to Chicago, because then we could do an Ask Geoffrey segment about it. So I did a little Google search, and lo and behold, this Irish song is written by a Jewish guy from Chicago, none other than Shel Silverstein.
I think I've heard of him.
Heard of him, famous, of course, for the Giving Tree, his books and cartoons and illustrations like The Giving Tree, A Light in the Attic. So Silverstein grew up in Chicago in the 1930s and 40s, and not only that, he actually performed the Unicorn Song here in our own WTTW studios in 1979 on an episode of our program,
Right
Soundstage.
here in this building.
Right
Okay,
here.
so let me guess. We have the video, right?
Yes, our brilliant archivist, Mike McKee, dug it out of the tape library, and you get to see a little bit of it right now.
So what do we do? Well, a long time ago, when the earth was green, and there was more kind of animals than you've ever seen, and they run around free while the world was being born, and the loveliest of all, right, was the unicorn. There was green alligators and long-necked geese, Humpty Bumpty camels and chimpanzees. There was cats and rats and elephants, but sure as you're born, the loveliest of all was the unicorn. Right.
That is truly amazing footage, and clearly those kids are loving it. So Shel Silverstein, we all grew up with him. What are his Chicago roots?
Okay, well, he was actually born in Chicago in 1930, and he first lived right here in the Humboldt Park neighborhood in this house right here. His father owned a bakery. This home is still standing on North Washtenaw in Chicago. Silverstein attended Roosevelt High School right down the street from Channel 11 in Albany Park, where he contributed to the school newspaper. He also worked as a hot dog vendor at Comiskey Park, bounced around to some local colleges, ended up joining the Army and serving in Korea. And he contributed cartoons while he was in the Army to the military publication Stars and Stripes, but he really started to gain notoriety from his cartoons in Playboy magazine, which might come as a surprise if you only know him from children's books like The Giving Tree. Silverstein really had a very diverse and eccentric career. He balanced writing poetry for kids with sort of actually kind of raunchy adult stories and songs that could border on crude. As an example, here's another clip from that same soundstage performance here at WTTW in 1979, where he's working the room a little more with the adults.
Even though I am from Chicago, where I live now is Sausalito, Marin County. And you don't have to do that. And what's been going on there, it's been going on in a few places now, is that we have nude beaches out there. I don't think Oak Street Beach is quite nude yet, is it? I don't think so.
Did he have to usher the kids out of the room when he did this?
I don't really know how that worked. He said nude beaches.
Nude
At first,
beaches,
I thought he
I know.
said new beaches.
Yeah.
Nude. Silverstein also performed on our airwaves in 1972. Look at this. With comedian George Carlin.
Wow.
Unfortunately, that footage seems to have been lost over the years, but we did find a few photographs. By the time it got to be the 1970s, he had long ago moved away to California, but he would frequently return to his hometown and perform at places like the legendary Gate of Horn, which was a small club on the near north side of Chicago.
And I see you have brought along a prop with you.
I did, yes. Right here I have this prop. So we all had this book when we were kids.
Of course we did.
Where the Sidewalk Ends. But did you ever notice, let me get to the page here, I got to open this up, that if you open it up to a certain page, what do you know? There's the unicorn song.
Wow.
In poetry form in the book, even complete with some drawings of unicorns. And I got to tell you, the unicorn song wasn't the only composition that made it big by Shel Silverstein. Look at this. He wrote several country hits, including A Boy Named Sue.
No.
Yes, made famous by Johnny Cash. He continued to be creative throughout his whole life. He finally passed away.
Am I just naive for not knowing he wrote A Boy Named
amazing?
Sue?
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
Passed away in 1999.
1999. All right, Geoffrey Baer, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And you can watch Shel Silverstein's full performance of the Unicorn song on our website. And while you're there, be sure to submit your own Chicago questions to Geoffrey Baer. I hope they're as cool as this one. And we're back with your thoughts about some of our stories right after this.
And before we go, some viewer feedback. Many of you shared your thoughts about our story on the Super Bowl commercial run by Dakota Access promoting its pipeline that runs through Illinois. Quote, "It's a crap commercial that is trying to suck in people who don't use their brains." I guess it falls to Dakota Access to make the case for any positive aspects to the pipeline construction, since one-sided articles like this will certainly refuse to do so. Another viewer writes, "I was shocked by their flagrant attempt to make us think oil pipelines are lovely, park-like, environmentally friendly constructs that will benefit us all. And why block this? The oil will flow anyway. Trucks and trains are significantly more dangerous."
And our story about new ways to complete census forms online and in person at the city treasurer's offices got these reactions. What could possibly go wrong? Technology isn't trustworthy. Technology can fail, but sometimes the post office does too. Hopefully, the additional option will encourage more people to respond either way. I'm not sure how much success the door-to-door enumerators have anymore. Although the census determines the number of representatives in a state, it doesn't determine who we send to Congress. The gerrymandering of electoral districts does. As always, we appreciate hearing from you. Join the discussion on Facebook and Twitter, or post your comments on our website.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Weekend Review. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.